More of the country's businesses are preparing to open their doors come next week in line with the easing of the lockdown, but there is concern that the move to level 3 has come too late for an economy that was already battling before the COVID-19 pandemic. Predictions from economists, Treasury and the Reserve Bank, as well as other organizations, show that some 3 million jobs or more could be lost in South Africa due to the global health crisis. Let's discuss this then with economic analyst Maudi Lentsoane from Lehumo Investments. He's joining us by Skype from Johannesburg this afternoon. Maudi, a very good afternoon. Always great to speak to you. So, do you agree with the view that the easing of the lockdown to level 3 has come perhaps a little too late?
Good afternoon, Tambegile, and good afternoon to your viewers. Look, it was always going to be a bit of a difficult one to balance between the need to protect South Africans against this horrible pandemic, and also making sure that at the same time we don't hurt the economy. So it's a very difficult one. I think it's, the government and the president are doing whatever they can. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that view that it came in a little bit too early, or rather too late, because also remember, I'm sure they are using all the guidances that they have with the experts that are involved in that particular space. So remember, if they had obviously done it too early, that could have obviously led to a crisis in terms of controlling the pandemic. The economic impact was always going to be negative. South Africa was an economy that was already limping, even coming into this particular pandemic. So we were limping, and of course, the reality is that we are going to continue to come under a lot of pressure, even post the coronavirus.
Just on limping then, what the pandemic has required of government is that government set up various relief schemes for the tourism industry. There's a small business fund relief operation that's underway. We're seeing the Arts and Culture Department doing its bit to help there. Social Development is trying to help the unemployed. When you look at all of those schemes and the fact that there's no set timeline for COVID-19 and how long we're going to battle with this problem, how sustainable are those interventions by government?
I think majority of the interventions that have been announced, Tambegile, are very good and solid. The biggest problem that I have is the implementation. Does that plan or those monies or those support packages, do they actually filter down to a business person who's looking for that funding, or is it just the planning? Because we also hear some numbers that are really shocking, that 2/3 of those that really need this money do not end up getting it, do not qualify either for whatever reasons. They don't get the money. And remember, it's not even about just getting the funds, it's about when do you get the funds. The time is of an important factor here. If you get the funds too late, you might not be able to save your company. So I think the implementation is where a lot of emphasis needs to be put on to make sure that those business, those small, medium enterprises do receive these funds at the right time.
So, Maudi, we're reopening on June 1st, or opening to a greater degree than what's already happened. But COVID-19's impact is global. We're seeing the United States battling. They are shedding jobs by the millions weekly. The United Kingdom is expecting to see problems. The Germans, also quite wealthy, struggling. Our friends or allies, if you will, in China are also not doing as well as they would have hoped at this point in 2020. How much of the global picture is going to impact whether or not our economy is destined for the worse or better?
I think a great deal, Tambegile. As you correctly put it, this pandemic is very global. It has affected many countries. Probably one crisis that we've never experienced in our lifetime. It has been a very catastrophic pandemic, and it has, cut across all the, many countries, and a lot of countries are going to really come under a lot of pressure. We are beginning to see countries such as China, announcing that they're not even going to continue to stick to their targets for 2020. They've abandoned all their economic targets. So the impact what that will then have to South Africa, it's also quite severe. And South Africa, like many other countries, will really come under a lot of pressure. I mean, the projections there from our own Reserve Bank is that we could see between 6 to 7% this year. In fact, they've revised that to about 7% negative growth. And that could still be further revisions of that particular number. So the economic impact is going to be quite severe. Hence, these lockdowns, the relaxations thereof is also very significant, and it's also very important because it will somehow, save some of, what is left of some of these economies. It could actually prevent a total collapse of some of these economies.
Final question then, Maudi, with all of this unknown yet to be seen, is it too soon to say if COVID-19 is going to force a permanent reconfiguration of the domestic and global economy?
Look, it's a tough one it all depends on how this pandemic lasts. I mean, we're already hearing some few positive news out in the US. There's some companies that are already successfully doing the tests. So a lot of it, Thembekile, is all dependent on how the pandemic is prolonged. If we get a vaccine, which is an estimate on some of these companies that by July they could actually be potentially, having a vaccine. So we could actually see a huge turnaround, a positive turnaround, that is. And so if that doesn't happen and we continue with this pandemic into 2021, I think a lot of this economies are going to be disrupted permanently.
Maudi Lentsoane, economic analyst from Lehumo Investments. Always great to speak to you, sir.